Welcome to Season 3 of the Film Florida podcast. My name is John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. We're really excited about this season of the Film Florida podcast, and we have a great guest to kick things off. Before we get started, though, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the Film Florida podcast. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. Finally, we still have a Film Florida merchandise page. Check it out at teespring.com/stores/Film Florida to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and now protective masks as well. Wayne Morris is a Florida-based film and television producer and production manager. Wayne has probably been involved in more film and television projects in Florida over the last 20 years than anyone else in the state. A few of those projects include Mortal Kombat Conquest, Sydney White, The Inbetweeners, David Makes Man, and The Right Stuff, just to name a few. In fact, Wayne is the primary reason many projects in Florida actually film here. We talked to Wayne about some of those projects, his loyalty to Florida, and how he's producing in the middle of a pandemic. Here's my conversation with Wayne Morris. Wayne, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
It is absolutely my pleasure and honor to be here, John. Thank you.
So I'd like to start with your origin story. How did you get your start in the industry?
So my start in the industry is a story that I very much like to share because it really is an opportunity for people to understand you don't have to have a relative in the business. You don't necessarily have to go to a certain level of education. I actually started in the business when I was in high school. I was walking home one day after school with a friend of mine, and he mentioned that there was going to be a meeting at the local public television station, which happened to be WQED in Pittsburgh. And WQED went on to become one of the biggest national production centers for public broadcasting, and many illustrious people came out of there. When I was there, Michael Douglas, who changed his name to Michael Keaton and became an actor, worked with me there. Rowdy Harrington, who is a director with many wonderful credits to him of feature films. Ed Lammy, who's the head of production for Sony Television. We all started together there as kids in public television. I actually had the privilege of working my way through college. I ended up not taking some of the offers I was given to schools to go for broadcasting and film and TV, and went to the University of Pittsburgh to the School of Engineering. So I actually studied engineering while I worked full-time in television, and I would do things like the swing sets and lighting for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which was produced at WQED in Pittsburgh. Fred ended up presiding at my wedding with my wife, who I met in college.
Wow.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And we went on to do many really amazing series. The Kennedy Center, once a month, we would go down and do huge musical productions. I didn't realize just how blessed I was at the time. It was just a kid working a job and working his way through college. And once I got out of college, I actually became one of 3 staff directors at WQED, and I had 3 weekly shows that I directed. And then we got into a lot of national productions. So I have a very diverse background. And most importantly, I just at a very young age realized that this was something that I loved to do. Didn't feel like work, back in the days when we could work 16 hours a day and never feel it. If I do that once now, I feel it for a week. So my background and my start in the industry was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at WQED with just the most wonderful group of people who we're all still in touch to this day.
So you mentioned you went to school for engineering, though. That actually kind of piqued my interest because I went to Purdue University, which is an engineering school, and I was one of the few people on campus that wasn't an engineer. Did you ever think of engineering as a career?
I did, because I have to say, in producing film and TV, it is very much the engineering process. And a lot of people don't get that. I think that a lot of the success that we have done is because we constantly reverse engineer all of our productions. We look at the end goal of where we're trying to get to, and then we figure out what we need to do backwards to today in order to get there, as opposed to a lot of people just sort of look at their challenges and problems and opportunities on a daily basis and don't really think too much about what the effect of that will be moving forward. So I can say that my engineering background has served me very well. The other thing that going to engineering school taught me was that I absolutely did not want to be an engineer at a big company. And I will say, you probably will not use this, but I will say when I started in engineering school in 1975, we were required to use a slide rule and we're not allowed to use a pocket calculator. And the next class that came in 76 were required to use calculators. We're not allowed to use slide rules anymore. So A, that shows just how old I am, and B, sort of the cusp of where technology was at the time.
Well, you're exactly right about the reverse engineering part of our industry. Throughout my 4 years, I lived with a bunch of engineers. So I, of course, never took any of the engineering classes, but I felt like I had like almost a minor in engineering just by osmosis being around. So I know exactly what you're talking about. When we look at your credits, many of your projects have roots in Florida, you know, Mortal Kombat Conquest, which is when you and I met back in the late 1990s. The Miami Vice film, Sydney White, Inbetweeners, Letters to God, just to name a few. Talk about your time working in Florida and what drives your loyalty to our state, which of course we sincerely appreciate, but what is it about working in Florida that you enjoy so much?
You know, that is a really wonderful question, and not because I happen to know the answer to it. But it's a wonderful question because I think it really is what I've been trying to share with people. And I'm more successful sharing this thought with major studios than I am with some of the decision makers in Florida. And what I mean by that is, you know, first of all, my experience in Florida, it goes much earlier than that. I did a project called the St. Augustine Story in 1983.
Right.
I was on my honeymoon, and I believe that still shows at the tourist center up there. I did a project for CBS, a backdoor 2-hour pilot called Staying Afloat, which was one of my earliest productions. And so that was probably close to 30 years ago. I still am friends with many Floridians that I worked with on that project, and in fact are some of my regular crew. It's a very long process. What I will say is that the way this all came about, I did a project called Rush Hour, the first Rush Hour movie for New Line Cinema.
Right.
And at that time, the head of production for New Line actually was a dear friend that started as my assistant when I was head of production at Think Entertainment, Carla Fry. So when we did Rush Hour, and that was very successful as a production before we even knew commercially just how successful it would be in the theaters, we were in post-production for that, and New Line asked me, would I help them with a show that they really had to do by contract, and that was Mortal Kombat Conquest. The plan was to go to New Zealand with Mortal Kombat. I had lived in New Zealand for a year doing another television series. So I loved it there, went there with 3 kids, came back with 4, just all the wonderful success stories. My wife can souvenir shop like no one else. But I said to the studio at the time, I will absolutely do the series and I will be happy to go to New Zealand, very happy. But why don't I see if we could keep it domestic? And we tried 3 cities before we actually were off to New Zealand. And it was like literally they wanted me to leave a week after the 3rd one. We tried, I believe it was Portland, Oregon, and San Diego. And the 3rd one was Orlando, Florida. We actually made a deal, and I was able to prove to the studio based on efficiencies that I believed we could attain. We decided to keep the show in the United States, and we did it very, very successfully. And at that time, it's funny, the film commission, Kathy Ramsberger, said to me as I was looking at places to live, she said, just so you know, your oldest daughter, who at the time was, I believe, 10 or 11, your oldest daughter is going to graduate high school from Celebration High School. I had no idea what she was talking about, but I will tell you that all 4 of my children actually graduated from Celebration High School.
Nice.
So yes, she was very Notre Dame about the whole thing. After Mortal Kombat, I realized that there was a very unique opportunity in Florida to come up with a production scenario that would be uniquely efficient and address a large amount of creative things that could happen that you couldn't necessarily do in other places. And a lot of it had to do with available crew, very, very highly trained, very experienced crew. It had to do with a lot of partners in the industry, such as ideas that you were involved with. Back in those days, we didn't really work with Universal too much in the beginning. We were working mainly with Disney. But there were just so many different partnerships that I was able to create. And back then, we actually wrote our own incentive. I actually sat down and wrote an incentive with Osceola County that really sold New Line on allowing me to bring Mortal Kombat in. And they were great partners back then. So jumping forward, it occurred to me that this was something unique that could be sold. And once you get into the years of incentives and politics and so forth, qualifications, and then ultimately to the time when there were no incentives, it just, again, it's probably the engineer in me, but we just asked ourselves the question, are we asking the right question? And that has proven to be a large part of our success, because a lot of people involved with studios, which are mainly finance people and accounting people, and some production people that don't know better, think that if you produce a show for $1 million, that no matter where you went, that show would cost $1 million. And if somebody gives you 30% incentive, then your net cost was $700,000. What we have been very successful in showing everyone, including the crew, including the unions, including the vendors, and certainly the studios, is that that is absolutely not true. That there's an absolute cost to incentives. And that, you know, right off the bat, you have to factor them depending on what state you're in. And that factor cost, meaning how much does it cost to sell your tax credits, you know, could be as much as 15%. So that's coming right off the top. And then how many things are people charging more for there because there's a lot of competition and so forth. And we have very successfully shown some major studios that on certain shows, it may cost you 35% to get 30% credit, which isn't necessarily a great business model.
Right.
So what has garnished my loyalty to Florida is totally the people here, and totally people's willingness to sign on to something that's not the Wayne Morris show. It's this thing that we've built here. It's the true incentive is the people. The crew started making bumper stickers that I see all over the set that say, "We are the incentive." And that is what has gotten my loyalty, because that loyalty has been shared back to me by virtually everyone here, including the communities and the governments and the film commissions. And, you know, we have a great racket going. I hope that nobody clues into us.
And Wayne, as much as we like you producing projects here in Florida, we do actually allow you to go elsewhere if you need to. It can be any of your Florida projects or something you've done outside the state. Do you have a favorite project you've worked on, and why is that?
Interestingly enough, John, most of my projects are my favorite projects, because I'm finally at the point in my career, in my life and so forth, where I only do projects now that really make sense to me. I don't almost ever take the most lucrative job that's offered to me. I get several offers, and the ones that I take are ones that I feel that there's a collaboration, and that what I do improves the creative of the show so much that people at the end look back and say, it defies sense how we could do this show for this much money. And I say, no, you're missing the point. It's exactly why we could do a show this big for this much money. So in answering that question, I would have to say, you know, back in the early days, I just had such a blessed career. I actually was the series production manager and post-production supervisor of the original Planet Earth series, which we got a number of Emmy Awards for and so forth. But back then, we were just sort of making it up every day as we went along. And when we first started that, there were no digital visual effects. We were doing everything BiPAC and, you know, all of the old film processes. We had every one of the episodes had a committee from the National Academy of Sciences, and it was just this wonderful thing. We literally shot all over the world, and you know, we just made it up as we went along. We needed to show a benthic storm, which is like a tornado in the ocean. And I remember in my kitchen with this plexiglass tank, pouring pepper and Karo syrup and stirring as fast as I could while the camera overshot it at 500 frames a second. And the scientist said, "How on earth did you capture this benthic storm? It's amazing looking." And of course, I didn't want to say that. So it's in my kitchen with whatever we could pull out of the cabinet. And another show that I did only because it was so unique is we did a production called A Day in the Life of America. And years ago, there was a sort of coffee table book series of when they would bring every couple of years photojournalists from around the world together. like the most famous photojournalists, and they would vie for getting who got the most pictures in the book or get any pictures in the book. And when they did America, they had done Russia, they did Canada, and Australia. And when they came to do America, I was contacted to put together a documentary film that was not about the book, but it was during the exact same 24-hour period. And I hired 23 crews to shoot 50 cities in the United States, and only film that was shot in that 24-hour period could be in the movie.
Wow.
So it was quite a while ago, but just this sort of challenge of putting something that together in, I think I had 6 weeks to put it together. It was just loads of fun, and some of the very big names in the industry now were either producers or cameramen on those shoots. And now I see them on a lot of the dramas we do in Hollywood, because we were all young and just loved doing stuff like that back then. So those were two of my very, very favorites. You know, people always want me to say Rush Hour or Two for the Money with Al Pacino and Matthew McConaughey. And those were all fun, and they all had their own unique challenges. But a lot of movies repeat themselves. But when you get to do something very unique, which is why David Makes Man is such a compelling job for me to do in my career right now, it's like producing poetry into a visual form. It's such an amazing series.
Well, you led me right into my next question with, you know, everything besides everything else that we've talked about. I wanted to have you on to talk about David Makes Man, which is filmed in Central Florida. For those that haven't watched the series, you started talking about why it's special. Tell us about the series.
So David Makes Man is a show that anyone who had an openness to their heart could relate to the character of David. David is a 15-year-old African-American kid living in the projects in Homestead, Florida. This is season 1. And David is going through the human dilemma of, he lives in the projects, his younger brother's getting involved with the gangs, so to keep them off of him, he has to agree to do some things for the gangs so that they'll let him alone. And in that world, he's known as Day, but he is incredibly gifted, and he is the only kid from these particular projects that is accepted to a magnet school. And so he has to wear a uniform every day and catch the bus to go way out to a magnet school. Where there are a lot of kids of privilege and kids from schools where they just expect the kids to go to accelerated schools. And at that school, he puts on a different persona. He has to put on airs to fit in with the kids there, and they know him as DJ. But actually, there is a third personality, which is the person who he truly is, and that person is David. There's a scene early on where David gets in trouble at school based on getting into a fight with a friend of his, and he has to agree to go to a counselor. And when he's in the counselor's office, we see a shot where the camera is over the right shoulder of the counselor looking back at David. And as the camera trucks around over the left shoulder, we see the 3 different Davids dressed in the attire that would make sense for that character. So it's DJ, Day, and David all sitting on the couch, and when the counselor asks him questions, all 3 of them answer in their own voice, in their own thought process. And it just, you truly start to understand that who amongst us has never had to pretend to be someone that they're truly not in order to fit in or to get along. So that's sort of the essence of the series, and then all of the traumas and all of the visions backwards and forwards and so forth that David goes through to fit in a world that is truly unique to him, as all of our worlds are. That's basically what I would say, to me, the story of David Makes Man is.
And Wayne, season 1 premiered on the Oprah Winfrey Network in 2019 and is now on HBO Max. Where do things stand for season 2?
So season 2 of David Makes Man is an interesting story because we did not get picked up right away. But as the reviews came out, David Makes Man season 1 was actually nominated for Best Show of the Year in the Critics' Choice Awards, and we were up against This Is Us and Game of Thrones. It's quite the crowd to be spoken about amongst. And we actually did more recently win the Peabody Award for season 1 of David Makes Man, which is such a great honor, mainly because it's not voted on by people in the industry. It's voted on by a independent panel. So season 2 has been picked up. We actually have all the scripts in, which is in itself one of the things that I said to the studio, because we're on the lower end of budgeted shows on network television or even cable television. So season 2 is picked up, and we start shooting on October 26th. So very shortly. We're in very active pre-production at the moment. And, there are a lot of new things to consider with season 2. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but the story takes a very interesting direction right from the very beginning of season 2. That, again, it's just a tribute to the uniqueness of the writing. So it has made it a wonderful, I wouldn't even say challenge, a wonderful opportunity to yet again create something very, very unique with respect to a television series.
And talk about the importance of filming David Makes Man here in Florida.
So it was an interesting challenge as to where we were going to shoot the series. And originally, when I was interviewed by Warner Horizon, I had to agree to shoot the series in Atlanta, Georgia, with the caveat that I could at least put together a presentation of why the show would be much better served to be shot in Florida. And of course, they wanted to shoot in Atlanta because it was financially challenged series. And, there's the thought that, well, we're going to get an incentive. We did the first season in Florida, and I can say we did it without the incentive. We did it because of the way the IATSE agreement is set up, that we pay what are known as Maryland rates here. So we're paying between $5 and $10 an hour more to our covered crew in the IATSE, mostly our technicians, which is a wonderful thing. And I can say with those all in place, we were able to shoot the series for less than what they anticipated it would cost to shoot in Atlanta. So the importance of being in Florida, other than how creatively wonderful we were able to make it, is that Florida is actually a character in the story, and not just the state of Florida, but the actual weather and the humidity and the story is specifically about a young man growing up in the projects in Florida. It's old palm trees and, amongst the grittiness, there's a lot of sweat. And all of these things really add to make Florida itself a character in the story. So my two producing partners are Terrell McCraney and Dee Harris Lawrence, who's the showrunner. And they lead the writers, created all of the scripts, got me all the scripts uniquely in advance of trying to put the production together. That was one of the requirements I said we would have to do in order to be ultra efficient in this whole thing. Terrell is originally from South Florida. In fact, he still lives here. And the whole experience of David living in Homestead, Florida, and so forth was so important to him. Terrell wrote and won the Academy Award for Moonlight, and Moonlight also was the Best Picture of the Year at that year.
Right.
And I said to Terrell what I said to my wife 40 years ago, and what I said to every director since: you can have anything you want. You just can't have everything. So if you tell me what you really want, I will show you how we can get it. And one of the things that we really wanted was to shoot the show in Florida, where the atmosphere would be, really similar to the story, and the humidity and the change of seasons here, not going to fall, but going from really hot to really cool swings and so forth. And what it was like for these kids to live in the projects during these Florida weather situations and so forth, as well as just sort of a lot of the urban look and a lot of the, giant palm trees blocks away, but you're in a very urban setting where you are and so forth. So it was very important for Florida to be shown as Florida and really be a character in the story.
And Wayne, how has COVID-19 impacted your preparations for season 2?
Well, let me just say that I always like to look at things as opportunities and not problems. So a lot of really positive opportunities have come out of the whole COVID situation. clearly we all wish that we weren't having to deal with this, but it's nice to get this all back up and running. I probably worked for 6 months on my COVID plan for this show that went through, I believe, 5 or 6 different sets of lawyers at different companies and so forth to come up with a plan that was uniquely suitable for this production. We certainly have gone through all of the labor unions whose members are involved with us, not only Teamsters and IATSE, but SAG has been very involved and so forth. And they've finally come to a national understanding of what it would take to get back to work. So all of that is a really interesting process. We have 3 of our own rapid test machines on site, and we have a team of nurses that test people different amounts of time during the week, depending on what your position is on the show. Everybody gets tested that's here. We have very strict protocols. Everybody is always wearing their PPE. There really are no exceptions to mask wearing, to hand washing. We have hand wash stations everywhere. And then we have different protocols that we've come up with when people are on set, who's allowed to be on set when the actors are here. So that's kind of all the normal stuff. But in addition to that, we have also realized that there are opportunities to make the show so much bigger with higher production value by virtue of the fact that a lot of things are shut down right now. So we've gone out into the community again with partners that we work with, whether they be resorts or attractions or buildings in the community or whatever, and said, look, as long as you're closed down, we'd like to present you with a COVID plan that we have and come and shoot in your facility, given that it's not open to the public at the moment. And we're grasping that opportunity to make the show that much bigger. So what I would say is, at the moment, I have 5 different things that I need to serve on the show with almost every decision. And the first one would be safety. The safety is always the utmost important to anything we're doing. The second would be COVID. And the reason I put COVID second to safety is there are a certain amount of things that you have to make sure that people are not doing alone, whether it's lifting something heavy or having somebody spot somebody else or whatever, that we have to make sure that the protocols all match, and first and foremost, that nobody does anything that we're not prepared to do. So COVID would be second. We're incredibly serious about it. We have many plans in place for, if this happens, this is what we'll do. If this happens, this is what we'll do. And again, it's because inevitably some level of something will happen. Maybe somebody just won't feel well. If they don't feel well that day and they test negative, what do we do? Well, we probably err on the side of caution and deal with it appropriately. So we have plenty of protocols, and I couldn't say strongly enough that I would not have done this if it wouldn't have been for Warner Brothers and all of their companies coming up with plans to help us get this back into production. And then in addition to that, I have to look at the drama, and there's no sense in shooting this if we're just going to throw the baby out with the bathwater dramatically and not shoot the show that season 2 of David Makes Man could be. We're in the South, and it's a unique situation, and historically there are not a lot of diverse technicians, whether it be African American or Hispanic or Native American, certainly women in leading roles. And we have worked very hard to give opportunities. As I say to the crew, just saying that those people don't exist so we can't hire them isn't good enough. We have to make it so that 10 years from now, when we're done, this isn't a question anymore. And we have a very specific amount of money that I have access to produce this show, and we spend it very well. And as I said, I'm very proud to say that we spend a lot more per hour on our employees than most shows do, much higher budget in other states. I have no compunction at all to say that we pay between $5 and $10 an hour more to our contracted crew. The question when you come into a place isn't how little can I pay people, it's what's the most I can pay people and still produce my show the way I want to. Orlando and Florida in general has been such a great palette for me to be able to create from.
David Makes Man is filmed in Central Florida and is based out of Universal Studios production group. And I know you've enjoyed a long relationship with them, and they're a great long-term member of Film Florida as well. talk about how important the partnership is with Universal Studios.
Another great question. Universal Studio Florida and Universal Production Group have been a very significant partner to me over a dozen projects now, I believe, over 10 to 12 years. So the value of Universal Studios Florida really isn't about sound stages so much, which people think is a huge priority. And quite frankly, we shoot around the world in warehouses and closed down supermarkets and Walmarts and things like that. But there is so much else that becomes part of the overall how can we make this bigger that Universal brings to the table. For instance, when we were asked to shoot a huge portion of Final Destination 5, the 3D version, the very last scene of the movie is a dump truck driving down the street, and scaffolding falls in front of it, and the truck veers into a coffee shop and takes out the remaining kids from the story. We actually shot that in the middle of the day on New York Street at Universal Theme Park. And it was a wonderful experience. The guests just absolutely loved it. The executives, not only just over the production group, but over the whole park and guest experience and so forth, just love when we bend over backwards to make things available, in which case it just adds that much more value to our show. We did another production, one of the Beethoven franchises about the St. Bernards, called Beethoven's Big Break. And I would on a regular basis have the trainers take one of the dogs and put them in a rope and stanchion, and had a bunch of headshots printed with a paw print on it, as if Beethoven was stamping autographs with his paw. And people just absolutely loved that. And it made us valuable to the studio, which of course, that value means more to them than the money we're paying them for the stages and so forth. And it's been a great partnership with respect to that. And Universal has so many different possibilities that they're willing to really stretch the envelope with me. For instance, the new theme park they're building, we shot over there for season 1 of David Makes Man. We just needed some huge areas, huge acreage of vacant Florida-looking land, and it couldn't have worked out better. And, at the time, there was very little going on over there. So we're constantly reevaluating how can we adapt in our story to take advantage of things that they're willing to share with us. So in that respect, again, like everything else that we see in our world, we try to make partnerships with people, because ultimately what would be mutually beneficial in the long term. And the fact that we've been able to bring a dozen projects to Universal Studios, sometimes at times where they didn't have a lot else going on, and sometimes when they've been incredibly busy, and we always seem to make our projects work in a very harmonious relationship.
And in addition to David Makes Man, you're also involved with the other major television series in Central Florida, The Right Stuff. Tell us about that.
Well, The Right Stuff is such a labor of love for me. I've always been really very much interested in aviation and the space program. My father, when I was growing up, worked at Westinghouse Astronuclear Labs, and he was part of the team that developed the NERVA rocket engine, the nuclear engine for rocket vehicle application. And so I've just always been amazed. I, in college, played hooky for my classes, went to flight school and got my private pilot's license, and I got my commercial and my instrument and all of those things, because I'm just amazed by aviation. And so this story from long ago, when I read Tom Wolfe's book, and when I certainly have seen the feature film many, many times, when this possibility came up, I actually went to the studio and said, I'll do David Makes Man, but just so you know, I want you to beat a path to my door if I do it well enough to have me put together the right stuff for you, because I would love to do that. And in the very beginning of it, I actually did, coming out of the first season of David Makes Man, work on the initial planning stages of The Right Stuff. And I actually didn't start the series. I actually went and did another series in Virginia for Apple TV and Imagine Films. And then I was asked after the pilot episode if I would come in and produce the rest of the first season. And it was a very wonderful, unique opportunity. Leonardo DiCaprio's company, Appian Way, was creatively the driving force for putting the series together and the scripts and so forth. we actually shot out at Cape Canaveral. So season 1 of The Right Stuff is about the beginning of the Mercury space program and in the original Mercury 7. And then as seasons go on, it gets into the other programs, being Apollo and eventually, being Gemini next, and then eventually Apollo and so forth. But we actually went out and shot at the original pads where the first Mercury capsules were launched from, or the rockets, and the same bunkers and control rooms, and a lot of that stuff's still there. So that was really exciting to be part of, and the cast was just amazing and really just portrayed the roles just as they were. I think a lot of the things about the series is that it plays the characters a little bit more to who they actually were as human beings. So the feature film, which was just wonderful and very inspiring, but it portrayed the astronauts as sort of the published, the press look at them. And the series actually looks at it more through a human lens as to, what the trials and tribulations for these people were. The interpersonal relationships and all of the things that come up when you have people in competition for something, yet they have to work together to make it happen.
Wayne, The Right Stuff is just recently now come out on Disney Plus. And so the big question is whether or not there'll be a season 2. What are your thoughts?
So the reality of that question, and, I'm happy to share this. We are preparing for the possibility of a season 2. There won't be a decision made until we're probably halfway through the season, and National Geographic and Disney and so forth get to really look at the whole prospect. But we are planning for the possibility so that if it comes up, we're ready to run with it. Most of the sets and the props and the set dressing and so forth are still here in Central Florida. And we have always kept them with the thought that there will be a season 2. But given, the way the industry is at the moment and how things have shut down and now starting back up, I wouldn't say your guess is as good as mine. I might have a little bit more of an insight, but what I will say is you never really know about any project. David Makes Man certainly, with all of its accolades, was not really moved forward very quickly. We sort of prepared and we were told to wait, and the contracts are all done such a way so the studio has an option on us. We really didn't know until we knew. The Right Stuff, we're just going along the same lines, but it's just such a great story, and the process that we used really pushed the envelope and really got into the character so much that we are talking about what we're going to do when they pick us up in November or December. That's as much as I know.
We will certainly keep our fingers crossed with you, that's for sure.
I appreciate that.
So Wayne, I really appreciate you taking your time out of your schedule to talk to us. As I mentioned before we started recording, I've wanted to get you on for a couple seasons now. So this is a great way for us to start season 3. And on behalf of everyone in the industry here in Florida, thank you for your continued loyalty to our state and support of everybody that works here. And thanks for being on the Film Florida podcast.
That is so kind of you, John. And as you know, it's always such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks, Wayne. Just a reminder, you can catch David Makes Man on HBO Max, and The Right Stuff is now on Disney Plus. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org or visit our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Check out the Film Florida merchandise at teespring.com/stores/Film Florida. And please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.